Okay, so at this time we would like to welcome Jennifer Mendelsohn, a seasoned Baltimore-based journalist and the Modern Family columnist for Baltimore Style magazine. She also serves as one of Us Weekly's Fashion Police top cops and helped to, I have to put my glasses on, sorry, and helped TV star and fashion guru Carson Kressley pen his New York Times best-selling style manual off the cuff. Mendelsohn was a longtime Washington, D.C. based correspondent for People magazine and wrote the satirical Keeping Tabs column for Slate. Her work has appeared in both local and national publications, including the New York Times, USA Today, USA Weekend, the Washington Post, Washingtonian, Tablet, Medium, McSweeney's, and Jezebel. Yay, Jezebel. Please welcome Jennifer.
Jennifer Mendelsohn is short.
Oh. So if you twist that thing, it'll go down. There you go.
Hi. So oddly enough, they mentioned somebody is going to read from a book called Nazi Seances. And bear with me, but the two pieces I have chosen tonight have to do with Nazis and seances.
Yes.
Yeah. I was described on the Facebook page for this event as a pop culture writer. The first piece I'm going to read is about the Holocaust. So just bear with me. Interestingly, for most of my career, I never ever wrote about myself. I was a journalist. I told other people's stories. I've never wanted to insert myself. And lately that's been changing. I don't know if that comes from getting older. But this first piece tells the story of pretty much the most extraordinary thing I've ever witnessed in my lifetime. And it was the result of my dabbling in genealogy, which interestingly turns out to be a perfect fit for a journalist. And so I started dabbling in genealogy, and this is what happened. This piece ran on Tablet, which is an online magazine of Jewish ideas and culture. I hardly thought it was a life-changing question. We were driving home from a family gathering one evening this past May with my husband's 95-year-old grandmother, Frida, a Holocaust survivor from a small town outside Warsaw. I told her I'd been spending a lot of time on genealogy websites, immersed in tracing the trajectories of my immigrant relatives, most of whom, lured by the promise of America, had left Eastern Europe long before World War II. I had always thought Frida's family story was not as flush with immigrant tales. Most of her relatives had stayed in Poland, which is precisely why Frida had so few relatives. She and her late husband, Chaim, had survived the war by fleeing to Russia in November of 1939. They spent the next 6 years doing forced labor under increasingly dismal and treacherous conditions. They were the only members of their immediate families to have survived. And so I asked Frida what she had heard about America as a child. Did people talk about wanting to go there? I didn't know very much. We didn't talk about it, she said. She shrugged dismissively. And then, almost as an afterthought, she added, "My mother's two older sisters went there. She was supposed to go too, but the First World War broke out." My pulse quickened. In the 14 years I had known her, I had heard numerous stories about Frida's past recounted in vivid detail, but I couldn't recall her ever once mentioning two aunts in America, and Frida wasn't someone who could afford to have two aunts unaccounted for. "Mama," I said excitedly, "they must have had children and grandchildren here. We can find them, we have to." Frida seemed skeptical. Her mother, Chaya Roiza, had somehow lost touch with her sisters before Frida was even born. Frida remembers her crying over the one photograph they'd sent back from America, a formal studio shot in which they wore long black skirts. Find them? It seemed preposterous. She didn't even know their last names. All Frida knew was that her aunts once lived in Chicago and that one had a husband named Avram. One aunt, she said, had died of cholera. When Frida arrived in Baltimore in 1958, she tried to track them down using the meager methods at her disposal to no avail. It became immediately clear to me that we needed to find out absolutely everything we could about what had become of Frida's aunts, and we needed to find out as fast as humanly possible. It took 2 weeks of intense sleuthing, 2 frantic, fevered weeks during which I all but ignored everything and everyone else to get the whole story. I pieced most of it together online, poring over ships manifests, census records, old city directories, and Social Security documents. The incredibly generous people of the listserv run by the website jewishgen.org helped me use what I had found to get a solid bead on the first aunt. And in an amazing bit of serendipity, I connected with a professional genealogist who had been hired a few years ago to trace a branch of Frida's American family. She found an old newspaper clipping that connected all the dots and led me to the second aunt. Neither woman, it turned out, had ever lived in Chicago or died of cholera, though one did have a husband named Avram. The actual story was both entirely mundane and, for Frida, far richer. Her aunts Bela and Henya Ruchel had renamed themselves Bessie and Rachel in America. They'd lived long, full lives in New England, with 6 children between them and scores of grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And one Monday evening in June, more than 70 years after the Holocaust claimed both of her parents, her grandfather, all 6 of her siblings, her in-laws, and an almost inconceivable number of all the aunts, uncles, and cousins she had ever known, we learned the astonishing news. Frida had 3 first cousins, alive and well, the octogenarian American daughters of her mother's older sister, Bessie. I set about connecting Frida with these women, a process both wondrous and strange. Unlike some long-lost relatives, they didn't actually know a single person in common. Bessie and Rachel had shared next to nothing about their lives in Poland, names, details, family stories that could elicit a satisfying Lifetime movie moment of recognition. But the scant details we had all fit, and when a cousin emailed a photograph showing an eerie resemblance between Frida and her Aunt Bessie, we took solace in what we thought was our only bullseye. Until the night of Frida's first call to her 89-year-old cousin, Irene. I sat in Frida's apartment with her son, Alan, and her daughter, Rita, my mother-in-law, all of us craning our necks to listen as the 2 women talked on speakerphone. After a brief exchange of pleasantries, Frida asked Irene the question weighing most heavily on her. Did your mother ever talk about her sister, Chaya Roiza? My heart sank. The previous 2 conversations had made clear that this wouldn't bear fruit. I braced myself for Frida's inevitable disappointment that her mother, Chaya Roiza Sharfstein, murdered so unceremoniously at the Majdanek death camp, would once again be overlooked, lost to history. We were completely unprepared for what happened next. Chaya Roiza? Well, my name is Chaya Roiza, Irene announced, to the surprise of even her own granddaughter, who was also listening on speakerphone from Irene's apartment in Massachusetts. That's what I was called till I was 10. Then I said, no more of that. My name is Irene Rose. Chaya Roiza. Frida's eyes fluttered closed. She reached out for me to hold her hands, and we sat silently like that for a moment or two, the past and the present suddenly seamlessly connected. I thought of a favorite Sharon Olds poem. Upon hearing the news of the death of her first love, Olds writes that she wanted to, quote, close myself like a door as you had been shut, closed off, but I could not do it. The pain kept coursing through me like life, like the gift of life. It was the gift of life that coursed through us that day in a senior living facility in Baltimore, more than 100 years after 2 Polish sisters left their entire family behind to start anew in America. It can be almost unbearably brutal, that gift of life, but it is an awe-inspiring gift indeed. I brought a visual aid. I don't know how well you can see it, but the resemblance between the 2 women is absolutely uncanny. This was a picture we had of Frida as a young woman. This was a picture the cousins provided of her Aunt Bessie as a young woman. They're even making the same exact face. So we did not do the DNA test, but we thought we had a match. Okay, this next piece ran on Medium, which is the publishing platform founded by the founders of Twitter. And it is about my favorite guilty pleasure television show. It's called Medium Rare. Now we get into the seance part. We've covered the Nazis. 20-odd years after I left Long Island for good, the prospect of running into someone I know there always fills me with a peculiar mix of excitement and dread. So when it happened not long ago at a party in the generic suburban hamlet where I was raised, I just assumed that the woman with the long dark hair, whose name escaped me, was someone with whom I had gone to high school. Her face was just so familiar, her manner seemed familiar, even her voice seemed to ring a bell. The woman's name turned out to be Lisa, but she hadn't gone to school with me after all. I'd never been to the restaurant at which she worked. We couldn't find a single other connection. So why was I so certain that I knew her? Finally, tentatively, she offered something up, almost as a throwaway. Well, I was just on TV, on a show called Long Island Medium. Bingo. It's only my favorite show. I had watched the clip in which Lisa appeared about 20 times. I'd posted it on Facebook and Twitter. Lisa was working behind the counter in a Syosset deli when Teresa Caputo, a Hicksville-based psychic medium and star of a TLC reality show, stopped in. While waiting for her iced decaf, Caputo began receiving messages she said were from Lisa's late grandmother. "She told me she was a seamstress. What's with the buttons?" Caputo asked animatedly, decidedly more Jersey Shore than turn of the screw. "She wants to talk about buttons." "It's not funny," says Lisa's mother, clearly rattled, mouth agape. "My mother used to collect buttons. She had jars of buttons." It's a classic Long Island medium encounter. When she's not doing paid readings, Caputo traverses Long Island in her white Mercedes SUV, delivering impromptu messages from the great beyond to strangers. Her show is set in a series of supermarkets and bowling alleys, mattress stores and bagel shops. "I like to think of myself as a typical Long Island mom," she says in the opening voiceover. "But I have a very special gift. I talk to the dead." I've seen every episode of Caputo's show, which returns for its 4th season, May 12th on TLC. I even broke my long-standing self-imposed ban on Halloween costumes to dress up as her last October. And you can go online and see that picture I watched. And I recently ponied up $78.50 to see Caputo live at Baltimore's Lyric Opera House, where she wore crystal-encrusted heels so towering, I now suspect I know her trick. She can just see directly into heaven. Sorry, these pages are stuck together. Did I mention I don't really believe she can talk to the dead? My fascination with Caputo begins with the very fact of her over-the-top Long Islandness. I fled the land of shopping malls and split levels as soon as I could and lit out for college in Central Virginia, where I shed my accent, tamped down my hair, and affected a love of Laura Ashley, bourbon, and boys with Roman numerals after their names. But Caputo wears her roots, literally, like a badge of honor. With mile-high bleach blonde hair shellacked to within an inch of its life, talon-like acrylic nails, and a Long Island accent so thick it might actually raise the dead, the pride of Hicksville seems to have come straight from Central Casting's middle-aged Long Island housewife division. No wonder she was such a perfect target for SNL. When Kate McKinnon's Caputo asks, "Who had the grandfather who choked on a meatball parm?" every hand in the room goes up. There's something comforting to me about the characters that people Caputo's world, the familiar way that their aluminum-sided tract houses are decorated. Watching Caputo's show brings me powerfully back to a part of my Long Island childhood. The diners with their formica and mirror decor, the strip mall tchotchke boutiques invariably run by women with names like Ricky and Ronnie, the industrial park coffee shops where you can still get a buttered roll. I'm continually intrigued by the stark contrast between Caputo, about whom so much seems so superficial and fake, the tan, the flashy clothes and jewelry, even her impeccably manicured landscaping, and the raw, dark, messy, and very real human emotion in which she traffics. She bears not so much as a hint of the lugubriousness with which old school mediums with their black clothes and mournful mysteriousness are associated. As a television presence, Caputo is undeniably irresistible, like Lucy Ricardo crossed with Carmela Soprano. Though her show often sags under the predictable weight of "let's pretend we're really doing this and film it as reality" tropes, she is utterly, hilariously, compellingly watchable. As my sister-in-law said, I'd watch the show even if she weren't a medium. But Caputo is indeed a medium, paid top dollar to sit with people in her sage-scented dining room and convey messages from their dead loved ones. The show has spawned an inevitable Teresa Caputo empire, a national multi-city tour, an upcoming book from Simon & Schuster, a gig as a pitch woman for Priceline, a spate of talk show appearances. I've long maintained a skeptical fascination with the paranormal, but I am trained as a journalist with a bullshit detector I like to think is pretty finely honed. In fact, one of my proudest moments was unmasking a woman who was attracting a sizable following, blogging passionately about the death of a child I immediately suspected wasn't real. Second proudest moment, finding her criminal records online. I know that I am supposed to dismiss Caputo as a manipulator, a cookie-cutter charlatan who's laughing all the way to the bank, lining her pockets with vulnerable people's naivete. Do you get messages for people who tweet to you? Just wondering if either of my parents come through with this tweet. Are they proud? Love you, reads a typical message in her Twitter feed. But try as I might, I cannot help but love Teresa Caputo. Why? Because I honestly think Caputo is as genuine as they come. I think she truly believes in the therapeutic value of what she does. You can see it in the unmistakably heartfelt anguish with which certain readings leave her, and the lip-biting anxiety she displays when she believes spirit is present, emotion skeptics dismiss as a calculated part of the act. People go to Caputo seeking closure about the death of loved ones, and they inevitably get it from her, as she assures them that the dead are at peace and unburdens them of guilt and second-guessing. Does it really matter whether we can prove that she elicits that relief by actually conversing with her clients' dead children and grandmas? I find it easier to appreciate Teresa Caputo not so much as a psychic medium, but as an extremely charismatic and effective, if unorthodox, grief counselor. Though I've read the angry exposés that claim Caputo is a knowing fraud, just like centuries of so-called psychics before her, I have a hard time casting her as a money-grubbing villainess. If you pay a quack doctor who claims his homemade elixirs will cure you of cancer, he's guilty of violating the codified principles of his profession and of eroding the foundation of medicine. There's a known scientific standard against which his work can be measured. But if you knowingly pay a woman to talk to your dead loved ones, and you believe that she does exactly that, who exactly has been victimized? What real service is she pretending to provide that she has not? What real science is she falsely claiming to practice? Unlike a fake cancer treatment, which can actually be detrimental, where's the harm in what Caputo does, especially if it makes grieving people feel better? If you really don't believe it's possible to talk to dead people, then don't pay anyone to talk to dead people for you. And don't watch a show about a woman who claims to talk to dead people. Logic, reason, and the scientific method remain intact. Problem solved. That said, while Caputo is a gifted magnetic performer, I don't believe her abilities are as uncanny or otherworldly as they may first appear. Though it makes me no less fervent a fan, and while she may genuinely believe that she is guided by spirit, I think she's practicing some form of what's known as cold reading, relying in large part on cues collected through nothing more mysterious than her five senses and a healthy dose of perceptiveness or intuition. Like all great practitioners of her craft, she often throws out generic references that would probably have specific meaning to virtually anyone. Cast a wide enough net and you're almost certain to get what appears to be a hit. Watch enough of her readings and the same familiar things will pop up over and over again. Mentions of family recipes, photo albums, pieces of jewelry, burial clothes, and graduations, for instance. Did you write something for him or her? She'll often ask, a question that those who've recently mourned are almost sure to answer in the affirmative. How is it that spirits are capable of delivering long, detailed message like, and this is a quote, "I need my little girl to know that I have never left her and that I am so proud of the woman that she has become," but never confirm their identities with the simplest of things like full names or addresses? Caputo asks more questions than she makes declarative statements, and then uses the answers she's given to elaborate so that the person being read often unwittingly provides much of the so-called reading. Sometimes she shoots fish in a barrel, as when she asked the parents of a dead child whether the death was unexpected or tragic, or the widow of a fallen police officer if, quote, something had been named after him. In a particularly cringeworthy 2011 reading of a New York City firefighter, she asks, "Did something happen, I want to say like 10 years ago, where you were like, somebody was really watching over me that day?" Really, Teresa? You're better than that. But sometimes, I have absolutely no idea how Caputo gets the information she apparently has about total strangers. How could she have known that a random woman doing her grocery shopping had trained for the Olympics? How did she come up with an unusual name like Mildred, the woman's late grandmother? And why was ring the first thing Caputo wrote down when reading a woman who had privately decided that it should be the signal word from her dead husband to let her know that he was there? "Holy shit," the woman replied, her hand reflexively covering her mouth. How did she know to mention a pocket watch to a woman who had deliberately hid one under a sofa cushion to test Caputo's skills? Are there simple, logical explanations for these things, or is it something far eerier? For a long time, the answer to that question was fascinating in a wholly impersonal way. I watched Long Island media with the same sort of dishy enthusiasm I have for other guilty reality TV pleasures like The Bachelor and Say Yes to the Dress. It was fun to try to explain away the Sixth Sense element of the show, all the while being charmed by Caputo's outsized ebullience. Until last April, when my father died unexpectedly after a stroke. Suddenly, I came to see the show in an entirely new light. I now see the pathos and desperation that underlie Caputo's success. I finally understand why people often say they can't make it through an episode without weeping. I confess I'm now one of them. I probably would have gone to see Caputo in person last month, even if my father was still alive, watching a Mets game in his favorite chair while doing the New York Times crossword puzzle. I've long been curious how Caputo might read me, just as I'd be curious to see the rendering a caricaturist at a party might make of my face. But as I sat in the same room with the Long Island medium, I finally felt what it is that draws people so powerfully to her. I know how reassuring and electrifying it would have been to hear something, anything, that could have been even remotely construed as coming from my father, even as I knew with every fiber in my being that that's not possible. It's the same way I'd be pleased to be told I had a long lifeline on my palm, even though I know it's meaningless, or the way I used to stroke a brightly colored rabbit's foot for luck as a kid. It's precisely that momentary falter in logic, that you never know, what could it hurt, that makes Caputo's messages so appealing. It's the reason I'm still on the waiting list for a private reading with her, although I think I would mostly just want to have the chance to reminisce about Long Island high school life in the 80s. Besides, as my brother pointed out, even if my atheistic, rigidly logical mathematician father really did make an appearance, he would probably keep his mouth shut just to spite her.